This week, I'm chatting with my friend and fellow podcast host, Hillary Ray. We've only known each other for a few years, so most of our relationship has transpired during the pandemic. We're neighbors who share similar values, and we even support the same CSA. Our CSA, or Community Supported Agriculture, is through Taproot Farm, a family-owned farm in Berks County, Pennsylvania. Each week from June through October, we get a box of veggies from the farm, which we pick up at a local shop near our homes. All members get the same variety of veggies each week, and yes, this requires a lot of creativity in the kitchen. I've sent some recipes to Hillary that I've really enjoyed, and I'm happy to share those with anyone who needs to know what to do with beets, dandelion greens, or pretty much any vegetable you can name. It's been in the box at some point over the last 6 years. When I checked in with Hillary this week, I asked her what she did with the abundance of cabbage. She said she and her partner made a bunch of dumplings that she was able to easily freeze, but unfortunately, if I were to go that route, I would also have to make my own gluten-free dumpling wrappers. I'm not sure if I've got the time to make homemade dough, but I'll come up with something. Not to mention, my freezer is full of homemade soups I've made from all the other veggies. But the good news is, I am set for lunches for months. In this episode, Hillary talks about her monthly virtual meetup called the Speak Up Session. It's a free gathering for entrepreneurs, leaders, and changemakers craving a communication style that aligns who they are, what they do, and what they stand for. Check out her website or sign up for her newsletter to get the latest information regarding dates and times. Her November meetup was this past week, so make sure to join in December. We also discuss Hillary's decision to leave social media at the end of last year, and amazingly, it has actually improved her business. It gave her more bandwidth to focus on other outlets. She took a leap, and it paid off. Very inspiring. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the following episode, Have I Got Some Stories for You with Hillary Ray. My guest today is Hillary Ray, founder of Tell Me a Story. How are you doing today, Hillary?
I'm good, MG. I'm excited to be here with you.
I am so excited for this as well. We'll dive more into Tell Me a Story and what that's all about. I always start off by talking about how we met. So you and I met through some mutual friends at a networking event in the summer of 2019. And at the time, you were looking for like some alternate options for venues for your workshops. And you had been, kind of committed. I want to say it was like your office space maybe, or another space that you had been using for quite a while and just wanted some creative options. So we met for a real coffee. So I have not met someone in person for coffee in a very, very, very long time. I feel like the buzzword now is virtual coffee. But we had a really, really nice conversation and realized we're neighbors. And as we would start to become, better friends, both personally and professionally throughout the pandemic, we've just kind of really been a support system for one another, and ultimately led to getting to work together at the end of 2020. So we'll dive more into that later, but can you tell me more about Tell Me a Story and your whole business model? And then also you had mentioned you went through a major shift because you did so many in-person workshops, and it was a lot of like in-person, face-to-face, and you yourself shifted beyond the venue with your business model. So tell me more.
Yeah. Well, I think back to that. We met on a rooftop of a WeWork in Center City. And it's just so funny to think back to that, summer of 2019, because everything to me was in person, like events. Like I went to comedy shows and storytelling nights and so many networking events. I worked with all of the people I work with in my company, which I'm happy to talk about more, in person. And so just to I have that vivid memory of meeting you on that rooftop, drinking some sort of complimentary cocktail that I think was given to us, and just really clicking and connecting. And then, going to our local Rival Brothers, and there being other people sitting around us that we knew, and everyone was kind of talking to each other. I just really miss that sense of community. So thank you for bringing that up. But so Tell Me a Story's been around since 2011. So in May of this year, 2021, I celebrated 10 years of live storytelling shows in Philadelphia, which is how it started. I was telling stories on stage and was finding that the only performances or opportunities in Philadelphia were competitive, and I would do that, but that wasn't like I didn't want to win a story slam. Like that wasn't why I was doing it. I was so passionate just about expressing who I was in this telling stories from my life format and like two rooms of strangers. And so friends of friends were opening a coffee shop called Shot Tower Coffee, which has also been around for over 10, almost 11 years. And so it was right at the inception of that coffee shop too. And Marielle, one of the co-owners, I knew her, not her then boyfriend, now husband, socially, but I never knew her. And she had an idea for a storytelling night. And so we got together. I put a poll on Facebook for the name. Some of the other options were like, shut up, please shut up. Like things where I'm like, I'm so glad it's telling me a story. And I don't even know who suggested it. It was like one of those things where people could suggest. And I went with it. And I would say, like, a couple years into doing these shows, I started teaching workshops, and it was more for people that were just like, I want to figure out how to, like, what stories I have to share. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I had a teaching artist background, like mostly teaching little kids theater and singing and dance and acting. Um, and I also had spent a year teaching in Japan. So I was like into teaching. I liked doing it. And so I kind of just like kept saying yes. Like, yeah, I'll have a workshop. And then people came. And then I just started developing my own methodology that was just pulled from like all different aspects of my life. And I just said yes, yes, yes. And I got to a point where I was more passionate about helping other people find their stories and tell their stories than I was about telling my own on stage. So I would host the show, but I wouldn't really tell stories there. And then I would really like, all I wanted to do was teach people and like work with people one on one in groups. And so I like wrote a business plan. This is like in 2015, 2016. And actually it was in 2015 because at the end of 2016, I just was like, okay, I'm done my freelance teaching artist career slash like cobbled together 6 different jobs to live. And I was like, I really believe in this. I've like, I know that I have something to offer. And I went all in, and we met at a WeWork. Like WeWork gave me free office space, and it really just felt like a timing of like, oh, I just was offered a office for free. Like, let me do this full time. And it hasn't been like an easy ride, but this was like at all. But I'm so glad I took the leap. And so yeah, now I work with clients that are mostly like people like you that run their own businesses, have a podcast, or are curious about going on other people's podcasts or starting a podcast. And then I also work with a bunch of clients that are leaders at large companies, and they just want to step up their leadership and like do something different, knowing that it's harder to stand out in those corporate environments. And yeah, pre-pandemic, my whole model was local. Like I worked primarily with Philadelphians.
Because it was all in person. So,
Yeah, and I just never.
you're not traveling across the country.
Well, I actually was traveling across the country. I was doing a lot of like, not a lot, but I did like keynote speeches at conferences, and I would do stuff. So I was like doing stuff, but always was just like, well, my clients will be in Philadelphia. Like I just like never thought beyond that. And so, yeah, and I had all these group workshops, and it was all about like finding where to do them. And so as I developed them, I was using, yeah, like conference rooms that WeWork had like it's funny now because I feel like it probably looks so dated already, but like it was like high design. It was like being in like an anthropology or something. So like they had like nice conference rooms. So like I would do that. And then I sort of outgrew that. And then I used this place called the Broad on Mifflin, which is funny because it's on
Yes,
Broad.
yes, yes, yes. And it's basically like a rentable third floor above a dentist office that, you can host parties. So I think you might have connected me with the owner, and he's just like, I don't want to do this anymore. That he was completely burnt out. It's, we own the space, and he was just done dealing with like party after party after party and just dealing with people. So I would not be surprised if he either sold it or.
I think, well, his dad is the dentist of the dentist office. Like, I think he's just like a tried and true Philadelphian. It was like a hydroponic garden for a while. Like there was like, it's been a bunch of different things that guy tried. I think he also runs a bread company or co-runs a bread company.
I think so.
But yeah. So I did that. And then Fireball Printing, which is like this really great like actually they have clients all over, but like printer, like I do all of my like, well, I was doing like posters and postcards, all the physical things for physical outside other venue things.
I use them to print
Yeah.
in 1,000 postcards
Yes, I did that too.
in January, February of 2020. So those are sitting in my basement.
I remember throwing mine out. I like took a big recycling. I remember recycling them in a big stack. But yeah, they had a really beautiful space and they had a bunch of like conference workshopy rooms that they were renting out as like supplemental income. But it was all the way in Kensington. It was just hard. But anyway, I'm now fully virtual because of the pandemic. I had to go beyond the venue and I had to also go like mindset wise beyond the venue because I really believed that like I teach communication and I truly believe that like there's an energy exchanged, like an actual tangible energy exchanged between a audience and a speaker. And I was like really set in my ways that there was no way to replicate that virtually. And I was proven otherwise because I was forced to. And now I'm
You
like,
didn't have a choice.
no. And now I'm like more passionate about virtual, like doing, like working on the skills and developing the skills virtually to then like in person, it will just be like all the more like transformative. So yeah, I have like I work with people all one-on-one now, whereas before I was groups. I work with people all over the world, which I just like never even set that goal for myself because I don't know if I really like I just don't set like big I mean, I have like I'm ambitious, but I don't set like world goals. But that happened and yeah, and I work in my home office, which I like never thought I would ever like working at home, and I actually love it.
And it's crazy to think about too because as we got to know each other, we knew each other for about a year before I got the chance to work with you and did that kind of like a first I think it was like maybe a week long
Brains.
commitment.
Yeah,
The
we started
first
with the
like the brainstorming
brainstorming.
session.
Mhm.
And it worked out so perfectly because, obviously 2020 was a very rough year for me professionally. Had some, great experiences being able to do the elopements and micro weddings, but it still wasn't the year that obviously anybody anticipated. And so when I kind of had this opportunity that you were marketing this brainstorming session and you were just saying all the right words, and I'm like, this sounds like exactly what I need right now. And I was able to do it remotely. That my husband and I were actually, working remotely in Maine for a couple of weeks, and to be able to have this nature and this space and have the chance to work with you. That I thought that was kind of that's it. And then you had reached out to me again in November and said, I'm kind of offering a special for clients who have done the brainstorming situation. You're interested, and it's like, okay, I'm not really sure if this is the right fit for me. And then I read like all of the things that this, full intense one-on-one workshop is supposed to bring out. And it checked all the boxes. And that was also at a time when events had been completely shut down again in mid-November and not knowing when things were going to reopen as far as, weddings and private events. So I'm like, okay, you got me. I'm in. And it was such an invaluable experience. And so thinking about if it would have been in person, that I'm curious, because what I loved is being able to have recorded our conversations via Zoom and forcing me to go back and watch myself on Zoom. So, listeners, that's how you hear me talk about Hillary Ray in the process and working with her a lot on the podcast, because had I not had that experience, I don't know if I would have had the confidence to listen to my own voice and, project, tell my stories. And I'm curious if the in-person, did you have recordings that your students, your clients would go back and review? What was that process like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I did group workshops, no. And really I for a while thought that it needed to be this kind of storytelling work needed to be done in a group so that when you are like because they used to be like full day, my workshops were like full day experiences. And so like by the end of the day, you have the story essentially that you're worked on. And it's nowhere near where it gets to in the one-on-one work that I do now. But it gets to a place where like, okay, I can give voice to it in front of people. And so I believed like, oh, great. If we do this together, then everyone has a room of people supporting them. And yes, I know that was like a positive experience for the people, but there was this element of like performance or like inauthentic or veiling or something where it was like because there were like it was so focused on the other. And so what I find, and I'll go to back to your question about the recording in a moment, what I find working one-on-one, and I did have a handful of one-on-one clients in person too, is that there's no like pre-censorship or like worry about like what the outcome of it is going to be. So when you get and you have your story and then you are ready to tell it to an audience, you trust yourself enough that then you can trust your audience too, and you're like more likely to communicate authentically. And so with my coaching clients that I had in person, I had an audio recorder. So I would send them audio files, but they wouldn't have video. And I think video is like what you said, it's like both, like body language, expression, and voice, and what you said. And that it is always part of the homework I give people to listen or watch back portions of the sessions. So you
It's
bring up
so
a
helpful.
really good point.
And especially it was a good reminder too that like even if I'm having not the best day or, maybe ate something I shouldn't have the day before, that when I'm not feeling my best, that didn't come through on the video. That, I think there was one day that we had met and I just wasn't my tip top, and you're like, I didn't even notice. And watching the video, I'm like, I didn't even notice either. Like I never, so I don't know, maybe it's this award-winning smile that just
No,
powers
I mean,
through.
probably, but also it shows like that's like proof that whatever's going on in your head, like when you're like putting yourself out there is such falsity, and like the video back, and even like when you try to remember how things went, like your memory plays tricks on you. So like having video proof of like, oh no, like I actually feel really good about this. Maybe I'm just being hard on myself, or like
And aren't
maybe
we
I was
always
feeling this way.
anyway? I mean, we're always our own worst critics and
Hmm.
judging ourselves way harsher than anybody else ever would. And so that was another awesome thing to come out of this, of just get over it and just
Hmm.
power through. And so
Yeah.
the timing was great because you and I finished working together. I guess technically like the workshops we had finished in December, but I was still able to work with you over Voxer for the next month.
Yeah.
And so in December of 2020, when Daniela says, do you want to host a podcast? I'm like, I am prepared for this. I
Yes.
can do this. So it was great to just kind of have this set. Cause again, winter events going to be happening again. I've
Hmm.
got spare time. So the
Yeah.
timing just worked out. And, I liked how you were saying before, you just kind of kept saying, yes, yes, yes. And that's kind of been my momentum of the last couple of years. It's sometimes the universe is just like, hey, you need this, do this, and it'll bring you to the next
Hmm.
step, and just keep on moving forward.
Yeah. And I would say, I think I do say yes, like if opportunities are presented with me, but I would say I've always been the kind of person that like creates my own opportunities. And I don't know what it is that like even as a kid, like let me think that I could do that. But I'm really grateful for that too, because I feel
Being
like
an
I
only
have,
child, right? Is that
yeah, but I don't like, I mean, yeah, and I went to like a hippie school and stuff, but like just even thinking like, I don't know, I had a zine, like a music zine in high school, like a printed, I had like 5 issues, and like I somehow, and this is like pre-internet, I think, or like there were like message boards, but I like would at like 16 get like a press pass for the TLA and like interview the bands that I like. And it was all set up in advance, and like people like record companies bought ads for my scene. Like I just don't even remember. I don't remember selling ads, but I must have had to have done it. And I must have had to have set up the interviews. I was the only one doing this. I had a PO box, like all of these things. So I feel
wow,
like,
entrepreneur from the very
yeah,
beginning?
I think like that. I always try to think back to, and even in my storytelling of like, yeah, those kinds of moments of like that inform what I do now, even if I like hadn't necessarily made those connections before.
That's awesome. Well, so you also host your own podcast. Can you tell
Mm-hmm.
me more about your podcast, where it came from, and what it's all
Mm-hmm.
about?
Yeah. So my podcast is called Roshomon. There are 3 seasons, and I think actually it's complete. So something I'm trying to figure out is like, well, what podcast is next? Like, do I want another one, or do I just want to help people with theirs, which is like something that sort of ends up happening when I work with people.
I think we
Um,
were brainstorming. I think we're coming up with an idea for a podcast for we do the same CSA, the same community
oh
supported
yeah.
agriculture. So, sharing ideas about how to use your box of vegetables in a chopped style format.
Yeah, I would get bored with that. I wouldn't be bored talking to you, but I would be bored as the listener. And then what do you do with the months that are, I guess you just take a break the months that there's no CSA. But yeah, so I have a podcast. I won't say had because it still exists. It's still there to listen to. And actually, I like when people listen to it now that it's just complete because people can listen to it at their own pace. But it's called Rashomon, and it really came actually from a single live storytelling show that I did in 2015 for a now defunct festival that was called $5 Comedy Week. And the premise was all the shows were $5. It went on for a week, but the people who presented the shows, it had to be like a one and done. Like you actually not one and done, but it never could have been done before. So they were like new ideas, one offs. Some of those kinds of things went on to be regular shows for some other people. Like my partner has a show that started or had a show that ran for years that started there. But anyway, I had this idea to have a family tell stories on stage about like an experience they all had together, but you hear each person's perspective. And when I had the idea, my partner, TJ, was like, "Oh, you mean Rashomon?" And I didn't know what Rashomon was. And it's a film from the 50s. It's a Japanese film where the story was told 4 different times from the 4 different perspectives of the characters. And then that movie, won a lot of awards, but was also like in film history, like groundbreaking as far as the storytelling style. So that storytelling style has been used both cinematically, but also like in group therapy and couples therapy now. They like study the Rashomon effect and all that. So anyway, I had a live show. I put out a call for families. A now like really good friend of mine, and we were more acquaintances at the time, but we had gone to high school together. Said, "Oh, I think my family would be really into this," and we started brainstorming together on the phone of like, okay, like, is there something you all experienced together that you think would stand out and like be the story? And we were on the phone and she was just like rattling off all these things. And in my head, I'm like, no, it's not like these are all inside family jokes. Like, I don't think this would work. And then casually, she's just like, well, my aunt accidentally stabbed me at one of our Passover dinners. And I was like,
Oh boy.
that's the story. So we did it. And it was just one of those things where like it was my friend Rachel, her mom, her dad, and her aunt, the stabber, as everyone called her. But there were like 25 people that were there. And this happened when she was like 13 or 14. So she just became more curious of like, oh, I want to hear what like my grandfather said or my siblings or my best friend. So she just started recording all these phone conversations. And I feel like we held a phone up to a computer. Like we didn't have a recording equipment. We were just like, and in 2015, thinking back even then, it's like what we have now is not like what was available then too. But we made all these audio recordings and then we played them in between the live stories at the live show. And I had this like backstage light bulb moment of like, I want this to be a podcast because I had been listening to podcasts but I didn't know, like, I knew how to tell stories, but I didn't know how to make audio. So I then like over the next couple of years, I like learned audio documentary. I like did a program at Duke University. They have this wonderful place called the Center for Documentary Studies. And so I was back and forth between Philadelphia, where I live, and Durham, North Carolina, which I love.
Oh, you
So,
went physically in person to
yeah.
Duke University.
Yeah, to the Center of Documentary Studies. They did these like month or week long intensives. And so I started with one. I got a fellowship actually from this place in Philadelphia called the Independence Foundation. So they gave me a grant. So I took like a month off. I was like able to pay myself. I got all my equipment. I paid for my travel. I paid for the program. And I just like had one of those like life-changing weeks. And so I like signed on for the 2 years. So yeah, we had a couple virtual classes and actually that's like the first virtual learning I ever did, and it like worked really well. So I think that gave me more confidence when I moved virtually into like teaching virtually. But I went two or three times each summer and then once or twice in the winter for 2 years, and then I graduated in May of 2018, and my graduation project was season 1 of my podcast. And
Oh, great.
so
Okay.
yeah, so that's like I worked on season 1 while there, like with my mentors that were there, and I had a mentor from this other organization I was a part of. And so every episode was like a different family telling every side of the same story. And then for season 2, I just wanted to do something different. And I put out a call for families, and this woman, Emily, reached out, and I had never met her. She, I guess, listened to the show. I don't even remember how we found each other. Or, yeah, I guess she had to have listened. But she said, I have this large family now because I have 2 moms and they used a sperm donor, and I found all of these, and it was like pre-sperm bank. But she was like, I found all my siblings like when I was in college. And I think maybe we would want to talk about that. And I was like, great. So I talked with her, and then she helped me coordinate. And 15 interviews later, I made
Wow.
almost like an entire season about these families and about the sperm donor too. So that was like a really challenging experience, but fun. Also, I will say with all this, um, I wasn't making money from this because it's hard to make money from a podcast. I was very passionate about it, but I was also spending like 40 plus hours a week on this on top of trying to run a business. And I like do not recommend that for anyone listening.
It's
Um,
a lot of work to do a podcast, but the work that
yeah,
you're doing and the documentary certification, that's a whole nother level.
it was crazy. And I just like had really high expectations for myself because my influences were like This American Life and like, all of those things. And that was like the world I was trained in. And so I even had like a network of people in that world. And I was like, well, I can do this by myself, which is crazy.
Well, that's what I
So
remember because I had asked you if you would be a guest on season 1, and I'm in the middle of season 3 of my own podcast. I was like, girl, I understand. And
yeah.
I completely understood at the time. Now hearing your story about how much work you put, oh wow. So I completely understand, and I'm just very excited you were able to join me for season 2.
Yeah, I know. I'm really glad. And I'm glad I set that boundary for myself too. But yeah, so
Boundaries are so important.
for season 3, and this is why I've ended, is that I did a whole season about my stories and my family's stories kind of. It started as like a COVID project where I had found this book I had written when I was 10, and I had changed the names of all the characters, but it was like stories. And what was weird is some of the stories in this book that I wrote as 10 were stories that I ended up telling on stage, like at Tell Me a Story shows and things. And I was like, whoa, that's so weird. I like didn't even remember that I wrote them in this book when I was 10. And now I'm doing them like 20 plus years later on stage. So I had my parents record voice memo reactions to, like, I recorded the book as an audiobook, and then I sent them chapter by chapter, and they recorded like their interpretation of like what those stories were to them. And it was fine. Like, I think it was just like my parents were maybe worried about how they sounded. Like, I remember my dad like read from a piece of paper the first time. It was like very obvious. And I was like, okay, maybe this isn't going in my head the way I like thought this would. So I started like experimenting with like, okay, well, actually, like what perspectives do I want to talk about? I want to talk about the stories I tell myself, the stories other people tell about me, and the stories I choose to tell other people about me, which is in alignment with the work I do with Tell Me a Story. And so it kind of all came together. And then I could do this like kind of audio memoir thing. And I made it super, I was like, I also want it to be simple. I'm not going to like interview 20 people. And like when you edit like 20 people in an audio editing, it's like 20 tracks and like it looks insane. So I simplified, but it still did take a lot of my time. But what is really cool is I did find a way to like connect it back to my business. So it was like an art project that also was connected to my business. And I put little like sponsor ads in it. Like I sponsored my own podcast. Um, but that actually really worked. People reached
So
out to me, which
Roshomon
was
is
cool.
sponsored by Tell Me a Story.
Season 3 was, yes. So there were like little ads at the end. So that wrapped up. Oh, and I also did like interview. I was inspired by shows like yours and shows that like I really like as a listener to listen to like long form chatty interviews. Even though I like to edit stories, I like to listen to chatty interviews. And so I did 4 episodes at the end that were all chatty interview, or for the most part. But then I got all of the people I interviewed to record themselves reading things they wrote as kids. So it like tied it back together in a cool way. But I finished it in June of 2021 and I'm like, okay, I'm done.
Let's enjoy the rest of the summer.
Yeah. So I'm done with Rashomon, but I'm not done with audio. I'm like very passionate about podcasts. And I'm also very passionate about, like helping people find their podcast voice, I guess.
And that's what you did for me. And I really appreciated what you said about kind of how Tell Me a Story came to be, because it's very, very in line with where I am, with MG, the venue specialist, that, you kind of have these passions and you have these strengths, and you just want to help people by utilizing your strengths and talents. And so, there's always that ultimate goal. And with your clients, it's always going to be a different goal in mind of what, they might not even know what the end goal is. They just know they need help. With me, like I feel like I project pretty confidently, but when it comes to really putting yourself out there, it can be really terrifying. And so I think for my feedback with working with you with the one-on-one workshop was it kind of felt like business therapy and kind of getting over that hump and just letting it all go in the moment, and less prep, more presence, and just being there and listening. Which again, it's funny, like now that the clients are starting to roll back through as people are starting to book weddings again, that I finally had the idea to start recording my Zoom consultation. So not the initial conversation, like not the free half-hour consultation, but once a client books with me, that recording our deep dive where I'm asking them a billion questions, that it is so helpful to have my checklist. So I am asking them all the questions, but I am able to be more present because I can record this and go back and watch it later and make my notes that way. And so kind of similar to your experience of going beyond the venue, like I never in a million years in 2019 would have thought like, okay, my consultations will be virtual moving forward, because you do have that like in-person connection and being able to read body language and things like that. But, having the ability to record and go back is very, been a very, very helpful tool. And I was cracking up because it's almost like a podcast episode because it is a conversation. And so, maybe I'll have that conversation with clients down the line of, being able to use their audio clips and things like that from the recordings. Well, we'll see. Who knows?
Do you share the recording with them too? Like if they are like trying to remember what you talked about, or is it internally for you?
It's internally for me. I mean, I am definitely more than happy to share it with them if that is something that they would like to review.
Yeah.
But they, I guess they haven't asked.
Interesting.
It's also, it's kind of, you pick up pieces along the way of like, okay, I need to make sure that I remember to do this next time. And one of those pieces was actually having a lot of conversations about social media and having like portraying my clients on my own social media. And so asking their permission of, is it okay to, take pictures of you on site visits and, after, if it's a wedding, sharing your wedding day pictures on my Instagram, on my website, just to make sure that even though they did sign, my contract that says, I'm allowed to use their likeness, I feel like in talking to some other entrepreneurs that it is better if you just kind of have that conversation just to highlight the fact that, okay, if I blast you all over social media, you cool with that or not? And so speaking of social media, which is just a bane of my existence, it just gets to be so frustrating and my head is exploding with reels and TikTok and I can't even, but I'm constantly jealous of the fact that you had made the decision last year to phase out your Instagram because it was no longer serving you. And so how did you come to that decision? And Are you experiencing any FOMO at all?
Good
Or is it just
question.
I don't miss it at all and it's great to be off it?
Yeah. Well, one thing too that's coming to mind is like you asking like consent from the people you work with for that kind of documentation is like we learn that in documentary school, like that you create your own set of ethics, but it shows so much integrity too. So I just had to point that out to you.
Well, thank
That's
you. I
great.
consider myself to be filled with integrity. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so in July of 2020, I just like had an internal meeting with myself, like business owner me, like life me, like all the me's and I was like, "Hey, I don't like Facebook and Instagram and I find I'm scrolling and I'm like raging out because of like combo things like a lot of like behaviors that for me and the way I was handling COVID and like being very like overly like cautious of everything, like just seeing people I know behaving in ways that then it was like making me angry and like taking up this woman Shanta who I've gotten to know in the last couple of months always says like no one's paying rent to be in your brain. They were squatting in my brain.
it was time
So
to evict them.
yeah, I needed to evict them, and then also just, like, the other side of that is, like, all of the, like, really beautiful, like, social justice and anti-racism movements that I was seeing form online, like, I was so grateful to, like, see that, but then it also, for me, felt like mental health-wise, well, that I wasn't, like, doing enough, or I had to, like, show people that I was, like, anti-racist, like, actively, like, anti-racist and, like, all this stuff, and I was like, I just need to like do everything one step at a time. Like this year, like my business was broken. I was like still trying to get on a pandemic unemployment assistance and like that happened in July. Like everything just kind of came to a head of like the world is falling apart and the internet is stressing me out or the social media is stressing me out. And so I just like I didn't delete anything. I just like made a choice. I was like, as tell me a story, I'm not going to post anything. And I did a little Facebook, but it was mostly Instagram. I also didn't want to be in any Facebook groups. I also like just started to feel conflicted about Facebook as a company,
Oh, couldn't agree
like
more.
all this stuff. So yeah, I like went quiet, I guess. And I would check a little bit. I had this one Instagram account that I had set up as like a burner account that I didn't post. I've always had this. I never posted on it, but I used it to follow like celebrities and influencers and people that I liked from YouTube, but I wanted that like separate from friends and stuff. So like I kept that actually, but eventually I stopped that one too. But then I made the decision like end of year 2020. I was like on December 31st, I'm like hitting delete on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I had 4 Twitter accounts, 4 Instagrams, and 3 Facebook pages, and then my personal account because I had a podcast one, I had my personal one, I had my tell me a story ones, and then I had this like burner Instagram. So I deleted them all and they make it very hard to do it and like to keep it. But I did it and I was free. I felt free. I was like the people that I actually want to see and spend time with, I will still be able to find them. People can find me. I'm very Googleable. Actually, like the local post office last week, there was a package for me and I had put the address wrong and I went in there to check and she's like, I don't know how we'll find it if you like didn't put your PO box number. And I was like so upset because I like screwed up. She saw the package and she didn't remember my name. She Googled the name and was like, oh, it's her. And she called me and was like, I have your package. So like
That's
she like
amazing.
I guess she had my number because I have a PO box there. I don't think my number was online, but anyway. So like I'm Googleable. If there are people I know I want to reach out to, I can get to them. Like there was a friend of mine that owns a restaurant, Crybaby Pasta, and I had gotten takeout from there and I didn't have her email address, but I like got it through a series of like asking friends. So like I like got her new email address and was like, I loved Crybaby Pasta. Um, all that. So I haven't missed it at all. And then the weird thing is, and I can't attribute this just to not being on social media because I also don't want anyone listening to be like, if I quit social media, my business will grow. But my business grew. Like, and I know it was timing. It was like I had all of my like, beyond the venue container for my business set up. But I think it was how I was choosing to put myself out there changed. I was like, I want to go on podcasts. I want to do more speaking engagements. I want to like do that. And so then I realized like I never got business from social media. And I know it's different. Like, I feel like you have a company that is like very visual. Like, I don't have a visual company. So I feel like fortunate in that. And I know like my boyfriend gets all of his business from Instagram. He does home renovations, and people look at his renovations and that's how they contact him. So, but for me, letting go somehow just gave me a way to channel and focus how I was marketing myself and how I was communicating myself differently. And it just so happened that it like worked. And I know that it's like always an experiment and that there's so many factors that made that possible. But I'm really glad that it made it possible because it didn't. I don't have FOMO. This is the longest answer to answer your question. I don't have FOMO.
That's awesome because I I need to stop, like, before a podcast, I should be, centering myself and focusing and instead of watching YouTube videos on how to make a reel and just wanting to, rip a book in half because
Right.
it's, because they kind of start out of saying, okay, we're going to explain this to you, but this could change next week. So, NBD. And it's just been such a frustrating process. And it took me so long just to do my first like Instagram story. Like I don't think I did that until 2019, and now they talk about as video, and it just makes my brain explode. But so speaking of like centering yourself, you're constantly like performing, kind of on a proverbial stage. What do you do to ground yourself, center yourself, any sort of like kind of self-care? How do you prepare, or how do you walk away? What are some kind of tips and tricks that you implement to really kind of, be the
Mm.
best Hillary Ray you can be?
Yeah, so I've had like since college, like battling stage fright, which now it lasts for 2 seconds and it goes away, which I'm very grateful. But that was not always the case. But I'm just like a general worrier too, so I can get nervous, or I could start thinking of outcomes or future. I forget there's a term for that, like future
No,
forecasting.
I
But
unfortunately have the problem of like a worst case scenario that I will
yeah,
panic and think something is terribly wrong and just
yeah.
internalize all of that. So
Mhm. And I remember, like, when I first started telling stories from my life on stage, like, I remember, one of the venues that I would go to a lot was Latage, which was,
Mhm.
like, above a crepe shop. I don't think it's still there, but, it was like a little cabaret space, and I just remember they had really nice bathrooms. I would, like, pee 6 ti or I'd go because I thought I had to pee, like, 6 times before the show would even start, and then while I was in there, I would, like, sometimes pee, but I'd like have my notebook and I'd be like going through everything and like being like, I'm gonna forget it all. But it's like I talk about things that happen to me, so I can't forget it. Even if it's not the way that I want, like that my dream way of saying it. Like I just got myself worked up there. So like, and then I just worried about a lot of things. So I started meditating like in 2016. I can't remember. There was one year where I was like, I'm going to meditate for 365 days in a row. Cause I go, when I want to do something, I just go to the extreme. And I did it. I used Headspace and I didn't miss a day. And I didn't even start like right on Jan 1. I think I even started like December of the year before. And I went through all the full year. So more than 365 days. But really what it was habit building. And like sometimes I would just do 5 minutes, or like sometimes I would do longer. And then noticed how much it helped me be present, and that being present helped me stop worrying about outcomes and things like whether I was performing or telling stories, communicating, public speaking, or just in life. And so I carried through that practice, and like I meditated right before this because that's like how I get ready for this kind of thing, like podcast interviews and stuff. But I don't do it every day. But I use this woman, Jessica Snow, who has a website called yourmagicla.com. And she has a streaming service that she made herself. So it's on app. It's a little like user experience wise, it's a little clunky, but it's worth it because they're like beautiful audio meditations. And so I do that. I use her. And then like through the work I do, tell me a story. And I know you have this because it was given to you as part of our work together, is like I have a checklist, like a public speaking checklist. And to me, public speaking is anytime I'm speaking, like this is public speaking. Like anytime I'm speaking to one or more people that isn't like a friend or family member. Um, and I'll go through it. And it's like I don't know if I can remember them all off the top of my head, but it's like I
Oh,
prepped.
what do I have right here in
Oh,
my
yes,
little box of note cards that I use?
yes.
My public speaking checklist.
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. So wait, it's I prepped, I practiced.
I prepared in advance.
Oh, I prepared in advance. I practiced. I timed myself. I warmed up my voice. I hydrated. I let it I let
I
it all
grounded
go. Oh, I
myself.
grounded myself, which is what I just talked about. I let it all go in the moment, and then I thanked myself for a job well done, which is the one after. So
And
I
the quote at the
do.
bottom, there can be
Oh yeah,
no joy of trust without the risk of vulnerability, letting your true self show and experiencing others catching you, mirroring you, liking you, and letting you go when you are all there, visible, open. Nora Samaron.
Samaron. Yeah, yeah. Because to me, this like changed everything for me too. That it's like it is a partnership, like speaker and audience, whether podcast or live, like in person. And that's actually what I can channel when it is virtual. It's like there's still an exchange, or the energy is still there. So I really spent a lot of time on that. I grounded myself. Like I didn't warm up my voice today. I also like drank a lot of coffee this morning, more than water. But I grounded myself. So I do meditation, but like even just like feeling your feet on the floor, like one breath. I always ask the people I work with, like, what does I grounded myself mean to you? And then they'll like tell me like what it means. And then I let it all go in the moment. So that's that, like you said, like less prep, more present, like trusting yourself. Like it's trusting that you prepped and like you did, like you prep and behind the scenes to everyone listening, like your prep for this podcast is like impeccable and like more people should do it the way that you do it. Um, but like
Thank
trusting
you.
that and like trusting that then it's like time to like live in the present and like let new things come in if they want to come in, and but that you also like have the prep that you did to support you. And then I thank myself for a job well done is that like to not let that like inner critic voice enter too soon after, because again it's like your memory is changing actually truthfully of what happened, and so like gratitude to yourself is so important. So I use that for everything really, even if I don't have the card in front of me. But it is like nice to check them off. But I would say like the big ones for me is like a meditation practice, and I do like visualization meditations with somebody giving me the visualization audio, and then the letting it go and the like trust stuff.
Well, one of the last things I wanted to make sure you got to highlight, you have been doing these monthly Zoom workshops
Yeah.
on Wednesdays once a month. Can you tell me a little bit more about those programs?
Yeah. So another cool thing that's happened in this like being forced to go beyond the venue is like even when we started working together, I had like a bunch of different service offerings, and like that's why we started with the brainstorming and we moved into what's called the solo retreat. And now I just have this solo retreat, and then I work with some clients for 6 months after, like when it makes sense to. Um so now the brainstorming's like in the solo retreat and it just happens, and that was like very freeing to be like, oh, I have this like one thing that people can do and I love it and they love it. It's great. But I also really miss, like, I'm not doing the Tell Me a Story live show anymore. We did 2 virtual shows, like, early in the pandemic. I just, like, my heart was just not in it. My heart had sort of been, like, falling in and out of love with the show for a while because I was so, like, focused on my teaching and my trainings and stuff.
And I got in
Um,
right at the end. Like I was able
yeah,
to go to I think just one or two
probably the
in-person shows.
January one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one or two in-person shows at Shaw Tower before
yeah.
the lockdown. But that's where I met Cecily, who was
Oh,
on season
yeah.
1. So thank you again
Yeah.
for introducing us.
Yeah, and it was really special, and, like, I there is, like, videos of some of them, and they're still on YouTube and stuff, but, I missed, like, doing an event. I, like hosting things, and so I started this thing called the Speak Up Session. I actually started it at the end of 2020, kind of it was a weird experiment that, like, the format just didn't work, and I was, like, charging for it, and it was just, like it was weird. But in starting in February of 2021, I, like it's like a free monthly gathering, virtual gathering, and it was like the idea of like coming together to talk about speaking up and like where people's challenges are and like how storytelling can like really help people move through those challenges. And so it's like part of my like marketing that I do as well. But it's so much more than that. Like, it's so cool because some people come back like multiple times, and then there's always new people, and there are always people that I'm like, I've never met you, but you found this. Great. And that's cool. And then what I've been doing since April is that I've people that I work with, it's never like you have to tell your story at the speak up session. But I've been offering that to people, especially people that are like, okay, I did all this work, but all right, the story is just staying with me. And I was like, no, the story is not staying with you. You want to share it with other people. Here's a group of people to share it with.
Here's an audience. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sort of became like a mini tell me a story, but we do like a VH1 behind the music once each person tells their story, and we like talk about process, kind of like how you and I were talking about your experience. And then there's like a Q&A kind of thing where people like just some people submit questions in advance and have like a specific challenge, and I like spotlight them so we're both on the Zoom together and like do like a little coaching. So it's really fun. And I like do all the like tech. I like let people in and like play music. And like at first I was like, this is a lot. I need someone to help. But actually now I find like it's very easy. I finally also just got like a monitor and my laptop. So the one that was last week, I could see everyone and see my notes. It was like the most brilliant thing. And I know people have already figured that out with their home office setups, but I hadn't. And I was like, this is great.
That's definitely a different experience for everybody, because like it's definitely seeing the transition of like yoga studios and how they like that's how like my one yoga teacher that I practice with virtually on Friday mornings, seeing her kind of like shift and figure out like what the best way. So she's got her whole TV set up so she can see all of us, Brady Bunch style as she calls it, and be able to face her
the
camera. And so she's teaching the class but can also kind of look up to see how we're all doing with our dogs and cats crawling all over us while we're in downward facing dog.
It's crazy. I also just got like a webcam, which I think is so funny that there's still, I don't know, webcam just sounds like very 90s. Like when I lived in Japan, computers didn't have.
Did it come with a free pager?
Like, yeah, that's what it feels like. Because like I remember I had to buy a webcam in Japan because I couldn't see anyone on my phone or my computer because it was before iPhones and when computers had built-ins, and I like couldn't figure out how to work. So I just didn't see anybody for a year, like visually. I just like talked on the phone and wrote letters. But anyway, so yeah, so the tech setup was like challenging for me at first, but now it feels like a part of this. Like it feels like my hosting, like the same way I would host and set up the tech at Shot Tower, because I like had a mic that I kept there and a little speaker, and it was always just in the basement. And I actually for a while I carried it every single time. And then finally I was like, can I just keep this here? I don't use it for anything else. So I would like set up the tech and like I like doing all that stuff, like welcome people in. Like I do all that stuff with this monthly virtual event called the Speak Up Session. So yeah, I love it. And I'm continuing, like it's definitely through, like by the time this comes out, it will still be happening. And I like plan to keep it up for next year.
Because even though your household's fully vaccinated, but I know you've been super cautious, and I can't blame you now.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
It's gonna be a rough couple of months for sure. So well, I know you're not currently really visiting any venues, but I know you have to have some fond memories of a venue from the before time. So, Hillary, what's your favorite venue?
Yeah. So I thought about this question. I listened to your show and I love how people answer this. So
because it totally ranges. It's all over the place.
So I have a bunch, because I'm very like my background. I'm only going to share one. Like my background is theater. Like my whole childhood, I did theater. Like I'm trained in theater. It's my favorite place to be as an audience member. Like here, I am super cautious, but like as soon as I can see a Broadway show, I'm gonna like wear a mask, show my vaccine card, get a COVID test right before, get a COVID test right after. Like
we were actually supposed to see Wicked when we go to Dallas, and I told my dad, you got to get a refund because they're not doing proof of vax at the theater. It's just mask requirement, and I am not very trusting of anyone.
No, I'm doing vax card only, mask only. But anyway, so that's my background. So my favorite venue, and I was thinking like Philadelphia specifically because I'm like I was born and raised, or not born. I was born in California, but moved here to Philadelphia when I was like 8 weeks old. So I grew up in Philadelphia. I moved away for like 8 years, and then I came back, and I've been here for like 14 or something, a really long time. So it is clearly the place where my roots are. So my favorite venue is Plays and Players Theater, which is on Delancey Street between 17th and 18th. And so here's the thing, my very first memories of Plays and Players is like they had this second floor, and I'll talk about like all the different things that are on the second floor, but there was like one sort of rehearsal room, multi-purpose room area. And they rented it out for birthday parties. So I remember being invited there to go to birthday parties. And you walk through the main part of the theater, and it's like this very ornate, like it actually, they have a sign up. There's like all these tiles, and a lot of them look like swastikas, but it's the Native American symbol where it's like they're not going the same direction as a swastika, but it can be very jarring. And so they have this like historical, it's a historical building, so they have like a historical sign of like what they are. But it's just like this beautiful, and it's kind of run down. I don't know what it's like now. It's been in different stages of disrepair. But I did my like first children's theater show there. I was Veruca Salt in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Amazing.
And then I was the Velveteen Rabbit, like a couple years later in the Velveteen Rabbit. And so I like really found my like acting there. But then the weirdest thing happened. There's also like a bar called Quigs that's in this theater that was like a member. You had to have like a membership card because it was like open until like 6 a.m. It was very smoky. It was mostly for theater people, but then they just kind of started letting other people like have the membership. So when I returned to Philadelphia, I was like working for a bunch of different theater companies like the Arden and 1812 Productions and at the Kimmel Center for a little bit. But anyway, that was like the bar was like the theater hangout. So I would do that. And then the other cool thing that was happening is like 1812 Productions, which is a comedy theater company that I've worked with in Philadelphia on and off for the last like 14 years. They did all their shows on the main stage. And so when I started working for them, I was a box office person. So I did box office there. I was a house manager. So I was the one like responsible for letting people into Plays and Players. I remember they have like, it's not really accessible. And so I remember having to like carry this woman down the stairs to go to the bathroom, like all this stuff. So I did that. And then I assistant directed a show with 1812. So I was there in that capacity. And then I performed there with 1812 for a tribute to Joan Rivers. And so I did all that with this theater company that I really believe in. But then, so I talked about Roshomon and the first live show that gave me the idea for the podcast. That was at Plays and Players on the second floor because they had turned that birthday room into a black box theater that was being rented out to comedy and other things. And so the people that eventually started Good Comedy were renting that space out to do $5 Comedy Week. So that's where Roshomon happened and the podcast was born. And then I also had another storytelling show that I did for a little while in the bar, in the Quigs part called Fibber, where you had to guess whose story was made up. It was super fun. So and there's a ghost there named Maud. And when I was house manager, I have witnesses to this. A frame dropped on my head and there was like nobody around and no movement. The fire alarms were going off. There was like this old timey switchboard and it was like sparking, like all these things. And people were like, it's Maud. And I was like, I probably did something to Maud when I was like in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Who knows? So anyway, I have this like lifelong history at this like weird theater that's like in Center City on a residential block. But like at key moments in my life, the whole time, like it has like been there for me.
That's amazing. Wow, that is quite the story.
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up and see what its current status is right now. I'm very curious about it.
I walked by.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know if any theater companies are doing, because it's like there's like some theaters that were consistently doing shows there, and then the Fringe Festival used it a lot. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it's still there. I've walked down that street, like going on my walks that I go on. But yeah, hopefully it will like in some capacity open back up.
Well, I know we've already talked about you're not really on social media per se, but how would you like our listeners to find you or follow you?
Well, you go to tellmeastory.info. So it's, tell me a story, all one word, .info. And you can actually get that public speaking checklist. I'm just thinking this now right there. Like when you go on like 10 seconds to being on the page, like a pop-up will be like, get this checklist. Or if you go to the footer, it's there and you can put your email in. So you can get your own public speaking checklist if you want. And then
I definitely recommend signing up for Hillary's newsletters.
Yeah.
I really enjoy your newsletters because it's a story. Like it's always a story. It's always, you talk about there's always going to be probably one person in the audience that's going to relate to exactly what you're saying. And I feel like pretty much 90% of your stories I always relate to.
But that happens to anybody. That's what's so cool about storytelling. And what I love, like, seeing people discover is, like, even if your experience is so unique to you, someone's going to relate to it on some level. But yeah, so the newsletter, if you get the checklist, you'll get on the newsletter. And then the speak up session, that's also, everything's on the website. Like, you can sign up for the speak up sessions there. And you can Google me to contact me, like my wonderful Kim at the Southwark Post Office did.
Well, Hillary, I'm so glad we finally were able to make this work and you were able to join me for season 2 of Beyond the Venue podcast. You've done an amazing job with that curse word pivot.
Can I say like 2 things about you that I like really admire about?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. That sounds absolutely wonderful to me. Please.
And so it goes back to social media too, of like, so when we were working together, you were like getting story ideas for Instagram and stuff. And what you did, which I thought was so cool, is you would send me the image and you would send me the caption, and like sometimes before you posted, sometimes after. And I loved that because I felt like I could actually help you more because I didn't have to worry about like algorithm and when you have to post or what tags you need, but I could really help with the story and giving feedback there and like seeing the connections to the images. And I know that that's something you have continued to do and like have shared as friends. Like, look, I made this post, and you were the first person to do it, but other people have done that as well. Like while I'm working with them and even after. I have a client, Andrea, and she actually just made a reel about hating reels, and she sent it to me and I was like, I don't even know what a reel is, but I get it now, like from your thing, and was having the same kind of struggle as you described too, of like, what is this thing? And this is the only thing that's showing people my content, all that. So it still happens. And so I really love like people that do use social media. It's like, yeah, of course there's things that like they want you to do, but you can also do whatever you want. And I think that that's really exciting. And you do that. And I think it's like, it shows, and it's just really cool. And then
you had shared that piece of advice too, of just, like post what you want, kind of don't overthink it. And as a classic overthinker, it's helpful to get that advice.
Yeah. And then it was like such a cool thing to witness all of a sudden. Like it wasn't all of a sudden because it was clearly like over time, but you just like get to this point where you're like, yeah, I want a podcast. Like, this is great. I love talking to people and like sharing and connecting. And it was like seeing you get to that place. It's like so cool. And I love your podcast, and it's so cool. And the people, like the way you interview and the people you bring on. So I just had to say those things too, that it's been like cool to know you in all of these different layers of like friend, neighbor, client, colleague, like all of that, to like see the journey beyond the venue for you.
I love it. So Hillary Ray is officially the spokeswoman for Beyond the Venue podcast, and MG the Venue Specialist. You're hired.
Yes.
Well, listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. Check out Beyond the Venue podcast on Instagram. We do continuously post on the Instagram. And Hillary, thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Yeah.